Hi, I'm Susan Dubois, owner of Treenway Silks, and today we're going to talk about silk carrier rods, also called rods or silk rods. And the reason they're called carrier rods is because when they're making thread from the cocoon, which is reeled, R-E-E-L-E-D, they have a bunch of these in water and they spin them up and then they go around and around and around on this device that looks kind of like a Ferris wheel. So if you can picture two crossed bars with rods that stick out, the thread goes around and around on those rods. Well, this is going like a gazillion miles an hour, and so the thread may break and then it's going to spin around that little rod. After a while, you get a kind of a compacted felt from that carrier rod, and then they slice it off, and that becomes this wonderful medium that we use for all kinds of creative things. Hence the name silk carrier rods. It's where it came from. Now, the rods may be dimensional with a lot of curving to it and thick and hard. You can see my fingers are really working at this to kind of open it up a bit. Or it could be that they were thinner and more compacted or totally accordion squished. They're all carrier rods. It's just a matter of how much silk was on the rod before it was cut off. And all kinds work for all things. So there's not an advantage of one over the other. Now, one of the things that you can do with these rods, and this is my absolute favorite thing, and Liz Kettle showed me this technique a while ago, and it's totally awesome. She made this piece, and these are the silk carrier rods stretched out, spritzed and stretched out together, thin like this, laid onto it and stitched in place. Liz also did these small stitch meditations and uses scraps of fabric, and on this one the rod is going down the center with some stitching on it. On this one the rod is going across this direction with some stitching to hold it in place, and on this one the rod is going vertically again with some stitching on it. So it adds a wonderful texture and you get this kind of feathery edge from the rod, which is really distinctive and wonderful. And this particular piece Liz also did, and the rods were stretched and laid down in a way that she stitched over them. So that's the rods there. You can kind of see the sheen from the rod. And the way the stitching techniques from this particular piece are in this book that Liz Kettle and Debbie Bates wrote together. It's called Threads. And on page 118, you can see a piece that they did, and then there's lots of step-by-step photos and instructions about how to do all the different stitching techniques. This book is published by Landauer Publishing. So now we're going to do one of these really fun pieces. It's so incredibly simple. I'm going to slide this off, and for the first time, I'm going to take one of these thin ones that have been accordion squished. And so I just unfold it. This one hasn't been unfolded before. So I just unfold it, and you can kind of see how it's coming out there, and I flatten it out. And you can see this wonderful thin part that you can fluff out. Now this little bonus piece on the end, this is more rod, and it has a bit of the cocoon left in here. So we're going to take that and we're just going to toss it aside. You can use it for other pieces of artwork, but we're not going to use it now. Now this particular one is really thin, so this would be about ready to go. And this one is also pretty thin, but if I worked at it, I'd be able to separate this. But to make the demo easier, I'm going to take one that's a little thicker. Can you see how thick this edge is? So there are layers because of how it was spun, the thread was spun around those carrier rods. So now I can take and split this. And again, deep breath, go slowly, will work better. And on this one, there, I have this one separated. And I could try and separate that again, but under the camera, I'm not going to do that. I could do it at home where it was quiet. But this other piece is still has layers to it, so I can separate that. And this is a natural undyed one, so this variation in the color is just what you're seeing from the silk itself. And I could separate this again, but I'm going to set it aside. And I'm going to take one of the dyed ones. Now the dyed ones, even if they start out really hard and curvy like this, once they get wet through the drying process, they have a tendency to kind of flatten out. And again, I'll take this and I will separate. Good reading glasses help. You can see how this is coming apart. So the silk that's making this up is a reeled silk, R-E-E-L-E-D. And that is from the continuous unbroken strand of the cocoon. And so that's the highest quality silk and is going to have the most sheen. So I'm going to layer these. Now for these, I'm choosing to do them all parallel, but you could go in multiple directions. And since this guy's curving, I'm actually going to flip him the other way around because I think he'll lay flatter. You notice when they're misbehaving, they're he's. When they're good little girls, they're she's. I've had people ask me if all silkworms are he's because I always refer to them as a he. And nope, that's just what I do. So I'm going to get these so that they overlap a little bit. Move these out of the way. And then here's my little spritzer bottle. It's just straight water. And I'm going to spritz on this. Can you see the water coming out? This surface that I'm on is a Teflon sheet. You can find these in good craft stores. A Teflon sheet works better for this technique than a press cloth. So I make sure they're laying out kind of cool. I fold the Teflon sheet over it. I take my iron that has been sitting here that is on a silk setting. Gee, that was hard to figure out, wasn't it? And I'm going to put it on top of this and I'm just going to press. I'm going to press down a little bit to let the pressure help it. But the heat of the iron is going to dry that spritzed water. And then it'll be like magic and they'll stick together like these do. So I put a little too much water on it, so it took much longer for it to dry with the iron than it typically would. So you can experiment with a little less water, or if you have the time, put on as much water as I did and it'll just take a little longer. So now that it's had a chance, let's open this up. And it's stuck to the side, but there, it's now dry and it's staying together. So this is a great piece as a starting point to lay down for on a piece of fabric or whatever you want to do, and add some hand stitching with it. You can layer lots of these together. You can put them into shapes. You can stretch the piece of the rod in a direction if you want to while you're pressing it. Anything that your imagination takes you to do. Now, one other simple thing that can be done with the rods, and I'll demonstrate on this blue one, is go to the very end and just start to pull. Can you see how it's starting to kind of fan out? It's still together. Let me get a white against here. Let me do this with a white one. Then we can see it on the dark surface here. So you can take one and just start to pull on it and fan it out. See how the silk is still staying together? So you still have your silk rod, but you've added a lot of air and space to it. So now you have something light and fluffy, but those stripes back and forth kind of make little hash marks almost, crisscrosses, and it can be a really effective way of creating some type of texture for your piece. And then if you decide, didn't really want that, you can take it and bunch it up and create a three-dimensional texture. So just a couple of ideas of what you can do with silk carrier rods in your multimedia ventures. Thank you.